Welcome back to Monitoring Clinical Trials. This is week 3 where we're going to be talking about conducting monitoring visits. My name is Steve Pope. So let's take a couple of moments to review the purpose of monitoring. This comes directly from ICH E6. So we have A, which are we're going to verify that the rights and well-being of human subjects are protected. And second, we're going to verify the reported trial data are accurate, complete, and verifiable from source documents. And then finally, we want to verify that the conduct of the trial is in compliance with the currently approved protocol or protocol amendment, with good clinical practice standards and regulations, and with the applicable regulatory requirements, whatever they may be. They may be there could be additional requirements based on what jurisdiction you're monitoring in, so you should be aware of those. But these are the 3 things that we want to verify during our monitoring activities. Let's look at our learning objectives. We're going to discuss the extent and nature of monitoring. We're going to discuss the monitor's responsibility. We're going to prepare a site monitoring plan. And then finally, we're going to cite the requirements for monitoring confirmation letters. So let's begin by talking about the extent and nature of monitoring. Now this comes directly from ICH E6 section 5.18.3. So let's talk about some of the components that we need to think about with regard to the extent and nature of monitoring. First of all, the sponsor needs to determine what this extent is. It's going to be based on the objective of the trial, the purpose, how the trial is designed, what its complexity is, what type of blinding is necessary in the trial, the size, which would be the number of subjects involved, the number of sites involved, and then finally what the endpoints are. All of these factors are going to go into determining how we're going to monitor the trial. Monitoring has to occur before, during, and after the trial, so our plan needs to incorporate that. We also need to incorporate how we're going to use central monitoring or remote monitoring, as some people refer to it, and how is that going to affect our overall monitoring activities. And it's going to need to be in accordance with good clinical practice. The site should be following good clinical practice as they conduct the trial, and we need to be aware of what those guidelines and regulations and standards are so that we can adequately monitor their performance. And then finally, we may use statistical sampling to select what data should be verified. So this comes into play with a risk-based approach, which you're going to hear more of later as we go along. So what are the monitor's responsibilities in all this? Our guidelines state that the monitor or monitors, in accordance with the sponsor's requirements, should ensure that the trial is conducted and documented properly by carrying out the following activities when relevant and necessary to the trial and the trial site. So how do we do this? How do we carry out these activities and make sure that we're not missing anything? Well, we do this by creating a plan. So you're going to have a monitoring plan that probably your sponsor, or if you work at a CRO, one of the trial leaders will come up with that monitoring plan, and then you'll be required to execute that plan. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So for our monitoring plan, our guidelines state that the monitoring plan is going to describe the monitoring strategy, the methods used and the rationale, and what the responsibilities are of all parties. That would be the sponsor, the site, the CRO if we're using one. Who's going to be in charge of what, any vendors that might be involved, what their responsibilities are going to be, things like that. We're going to emphasize critical data and processes. We're going to give attention to the aspects that are not routine clinical practice. This comes into play quite a bit because you've got site staff and study staff that are involved in medical practice work in addition to doing research, and the two are very different. And then finally, we're going to reference what the applicable policies and procedures are. This could be standard operating procedures. Are we going to follow the ones that the CRO has? Are we going to follow policies that the sponsor provides for us? Are we going to allow sites to use their own SOPs? Things like that. So part of our site plan is going to be the components of the trip report or the monitoring report. And there are basically 5 requirements that are listed in ICH E6 section 5.18.6. So let's take a look at these and talk about them. So first, the monitor should submit a written report to the sponsor after each trial visit or trial-related communication. So when you go out and do one of your trip reports, you're going to produce a written report that discusses what you did during that trip report. And we're going to go over those components here in just a moment. So that's going to be written and it'll be submitted to the sponsor, usually within a certain time frame. It might be 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever the sponsor, or however soon the sponsor wants to see those. Next, the reports should include the date, the site, the name of the monitor, the name of the investigator, or other individuals that were contacted. The report should include a summary of what the monitor reviewed and the monitor's statements concerning the significant findings or facts, deviations and deficiencies, any conclusions or actions taken or to be taken, and or actions recommended to secure compliance. So when you're conducting your monitoring visit, if you discover that there are, say, protocol deviations or compliance issues, those would be documented in your report. And you would also document what action you took, which could involve discussing it with the site, documenting that discussion, putting together a performance plan that might improve that performance. These would be documented in your monitoring report. Then the review and follow-up of the monitoring report with the sponsor should be documented by the sponsor's designated representative. So in our final component, this is related specifically to the updates of ICH E6 regarding the R2 update. And this would regard reports of on-site or centralized monitoring that should be provided to the sponsor, including appropriate management and staff responsibility for the trial and trial oversight in a timely manner for review and follow-up. So the results of the monitoring activities should be documented in sufficient detail to allow verification of compliance with the monitoring plan. So reporting of centralized monitoring activities should be regular and may be independent from the site visits. I think that some of you that have worked on studies where there was a lot of centralized or remote monitoring involved, you've probably been familiar with some of these reports. These many times will be separate from an on-site report, but will still be submitted to the sponsor for them to review. So let's talk about the components of the IMV, trip or monitoring report that we're going to produce after we finish our monitoring visit. And these may differ from sponsor to sponsor or from CRO to CRO, but they're going to be fairly consistent. So these are the major components. You're going to have a component that discusses training and qualifications. This would be training and qualifications for the PI, for the staff, You're going to discuss what source data verification you did. There's going to be safety information that you're going to reveal. You're going to talk about IP and IP related supplies, any protocol deviations that you discovered during your visit, essential documents that you reviewed or collected, study supplies, verifying they've got adequate supplies of these. And then finally, PI oversight is the PI doing the things that the PI, he or she should be doing to ensure success of the trial. So one of the assignments that you're going to do this week is going to be to come up with your own monitoring plan, which is really more like a monitoring checklist that you're going to use to help guide your activities when you're out on site. So I'll discuss this in a little more detail as we go along, but as I go through these next components, I want you to be thinking about that and thinking about things that you need to check as you go through your monitoring visit. So the first thing we want to check is going to be training and qualifications. Now, a little later in our course, we're going to have some more information about this, but essentially what you're going to be doing is ensuring that the site staff, the PI, the sub-investigators are all properly trained. They've been trained on the protocol. They've been trained on any vendor systems that they're going to use. These would be your EDC system, your laboratory system, if that requires training, the IWRS system, the interactive web response system. They'll need some training on that. And then any procedures that are specific to the protocol. For example, if you're doing a respiratory study, you may have some spirometry training that site staff need to do. They may need to do training on how to perform ECGs. Could be a number of different types of training, but you'll have a listing of those things, and so you'll want to assess that at each visit. Source data verification. You're probably going to spend the bulk of your time on your monitoring visit doing source data verification. So that involves reviewing the source documents that the site has created to collect the data that they're going to use for each subject visit. It also includes reviewing any medical records that the subjects might have. They should have past medical records on each of their subjects, but there could be new records that come in during the course of the trial if they had a visit to the emergency room or the hospital, or they saw the doctor for whatever reason, and you'll want to review those. So there's a lot of information in there that you're going to be reviewing in addition to verifying that each data point that they have entered into the EDC system matches what they collected during the subject visit. Subject safety. That's going to be a component of our trip report as well. Remember, one of the purposes of monitoring is to assess subject safety, ensure that the safety of subjects is and their well-being is protected. So you're going to review safety at every visit. That means reviewing the adverse event logs. It means digging into the medical records, the progress notes, the visit notes that exist for each subject, and ensuring that the site is reporting and accounting for each adverse event that occurs. It also means reviewing all the concomitant medications, making sure they've got all of those listed. A lot of times these con meds can hide in some of these medical documents. So all of those things are things that are related to subject safety that you need to review during your trip report or during your trip visit. Investigational product or IP and investigational product related supplies. We want to verify and account for all IP at every visit. We want to make sure that the inventory that the site is supposed to have on hand, that they indeed have that on hand. Is it being stored properly? If it requires refrigeration, is it being refrigerated? Are there temperature logs that are kept for the refrigeration to make sure they don't that the temperature does not go outside the required range of temperatures? These are all things related to investigational product and investigational product related supplies that you'll review at each of your monitoring visits. Protocol deviations. We all love to think that there won't be any protocol deviations, but it's very unusual for a site not to have some. So you're normally going to find at least a few of them at each of your monitoring visits. These could be fairly minor in nature, or they could be important deviations or highly significant deviations. These will be documented in your trip report with some details on what the deviation was, when it occurred, and then if any, what appropriate action was taken to prevent that deviation in the future, and whether or not that deviation needs to be reported to the IRB. Not all deviations need to be, and normally the IRB will provide some guidelines on what they want to see reported in terms of deviations. Essential documents review. Now, this is going to be the bulk of this activity is going to occur during the startup phase or early on in our trial. But as our trial progresses, we're going to see changes to essential documents. Things like medical licenses, they expire over a period of time. So we have to make sure we have the most current medical license for an investigator. That would be one example. There may be additional essential documents that come into play during the course of the trial, and we'll go over some of those a little later as we go through our course. But there will be a section in your trip report that discusses what was done related to essential documents. Were any collected? Were any reconciled with what the site has in their investigator site file versus what you've collected in your electronic trial master file? You're going to discuss study supplies. Every study is going to have a collection of supplies that the sites need in order to conduct their study. So these could be lab kits, they could be ECG leads, they could be information that's handed out to a subject, say an emergency contact card, or there could be some dosing instructions. Anything that's handed out to a subject would be considered a study supply. So the site needs to have a sufficient inventory of these items in order to proceed in the trial. So you'll need to assess that at each of your visits. And then the last component we're going to talk about is principal investigator oversight. You're going to talk with the PI at the visit. You're going to discuss with that person kind of what you have found during your visit. If there's anything serious that needs to be discussed, obviously you discuss that. But you want to give that person an update of how your monitoring visit is going. If you've got a multi-day visit, you may see the PI during the first day. You might not see the PI until the end of the third day. It just depends on what the schedule is, but you do want to see that person during your visit. If the PI is not available for some reason, maybe they're out of town, which does happen, you'll want to follow that up with a phone call a few days following your visit to report back to that person. So you're going to assess that the PI is providing proper oversight, proper supervision to site staff. They're doing procedures in a timely fashion, such as reviewing lab reports or reviewing ECGs, reviewing source data as the subjects come in. Many times the subjects are going to come in, they're not going to see the PI. They're going to see the coordinator or the study nurse. And so the PI is going to review those documents after the subject has already left. So you want to make sure that they're providing sufficient oversight within their requirements that are spelled out in Section 9 of that 1572. So those will be a good guide for what to look for in terms of PI oversight. You have some reading assignments for the week from the CRA's Guide to Monitoring Clinical Research. I want you to read Chapter 3, which discusses regulations and good clinical practice, or GCPs. And I also want you to read Chapter 14, which discusses study monitoring. So that goes into a little more detail and begins to amplify the things that I've gone over in this lecture. So it'll begin to, some of that information will start sinking in a little bit more as you read that chapter. And then for your online assignment this week, what you're going to do is you're going to create a monitoring plan, and you're going to create your first IMV confirmation letter. So what I'd like for you to do is, using the information from this lecture and from your readings, I want you to prepare a monitoring plan for a site visit. Now, I'd like for you to keep this simple. Think of this as a checklist. Think of this as things that you want to remember to do each time you go out there. And you can do this in Microsoft Word. I highly recommend that you keep it to one page. That'll make it a lot simpler. It doesn't need to require a great deal of detail, but you need to make sure that you touch on each of those areas that I discussed earlier, which were the components of the monitoring report. So use that as a guideline and think about the things that you want to ensure that you do for each monitoring visit. Then the next component that you're going to do is I want you to create your IMV confirmation letter. I have posted a confirmation letter template on Moodle, so you can begin with that. There'll be some sections in there that you'll need to fill out. So you'll write your confirmation letter for your first visit. This confirmation letter will go out to the site usually about a week before your visit. You don't want to send it out too soon because you want it to be pretty close to the visit time. So normally about a week or so is the ideal time to send it out. You can choose any date that you wish. Your PI is going to be Dr. John Doe, MD. Your site number is going to be 001. Now, all the rest of the information that you need on there you can find on the 1572 that we reviewed earlier in the course. So I think everybody will be able to do that. It won't take you long to do it. And then once you've come up with your monitoring plan / checklist and you've completed your confirmation letter, go ahead and post those into this week's discussion forum so that I can see them and I can review them and offer you some comments and feedback. Let me know if you have questions, and I'll see you on the discussion forum this week.